Chapter 18. Benj's Stone. How could sheep be so dumb? Ram pulled the thick black thorn from the side of his hand and pulled the singing hand to his mouth. At his feet on the floor of the dry wadi, a fat sheep stood nosing about for food. It was covered with dust and bits of thorn bush tangled in the curly wool, but none the worse for its wandering off from the others. For an hour Ram had searched for it, at last hearing its silly bleating. With a swish of his rod, he drove it along the gully bottom back toward the flock he had left behind with Reuben. It was hot, and Ram could feel the sweat running down his back. The sheep must have slid its way into the wadi and then continued walking in it to have come so far. He brushed a brown lizard from his path and watched it slip quickly into a crevice. The sheep took no notice, stopping when he stopped, moving on when he moved. At a bend in the wadi, the sheep bounded out of sight, and Ram hurried after it, only to stop short at the sight in front of him. It was Abishur. He was sitting on a flat stone under the overhanging bank of the stream. For a minute they both stared at each other. It had been a week since the funeral, but Abishur still had not spoken a word about his father's death. Now Abishur gestured to another stone. "Be my guest," he said. Ram sat down. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. Abishur picked up his flute, but put it down again. "Oh, no more than an hour or two. I left the flock with Jonathan. He is the practical one, anyway." Abishur's voice was bitter. "Practical? Wasn't that what they called my father?" Ram was silent. Abishur put his flute to his mouth, and this time played a mournful tune, one Ram had heard before. "I wasn't there when he died, you know. Jonathan was with him, but not me. I was up in the hills, safe and secure." "You couldn't have helped him anyhow," Ram said. "Your father was a leader. The Levites knew that. I'm sorry. He believed he was right. You couldn't have changed that." Abishur picked up a small stone and sent it dashing along the wadi bottom. "I didn't try. Maybe if I had tried to help him, something would have changed." Abishur turned his head away from Ram. Ram reached out a hand to his cousin. "Look, if it's any help, I know something about guilt. I once followed your father and Jonathan without question. If Yahweh hadn't done a miracle at the sea that day, we might have died together fighting the Egyptians." Abishur made no sign that he had heard, and Ram withdrew his hand. "Listen, I know you feel that you failed him somehow. I felt that way too, like I'd failed my own father, and Moses and Yahweh too." The sheep nuzzled between Ram's feet, and he pushed it away. "Do you know what I mean, Abishur?" Abishur answered quietly, "I know what you are getting at, but there is a difference. My father is dead. Yours is still alive." Ram bowed his head in his hands because it was true. At least he had been given a second chance. How could he help his friend, his cousin? "Only Yahweh knows what might have been," he said. "You did what was right before Yahweh. Can a man do more?" A deep groan wrenched Abishur as if it had come from the soles of his feet. "When we were little, he loved us. He was good to us." His voice broke as he whispered, "I loved him. I would have died for him." Like a brother, Ram held Abishur's shaking frame close. When his sobs quieted, Ram sat quietly by. Their words were few, but after a while, Ram knew that Abishur was ready to return. Together they rose and headed toward the camp. Halfway there, Benj met them, the hides of 3 conies strung on a stick across his shoulder. The conies were full grown, with long black whiskers and broad nails on each toe for digging. They were not much larger than rabbits and hard to catch. How had Benj managed 3 at once? Proudly, Benj pointed to the conies. "Good eating," he said. Ram admired the black and brown skins, highly valued for their durability. Benj looked questioningly at Ram. "Want to trade? 3 skins for a goat skin?" Ram laughed. "Thanks. I wish I could, but all our spare skins have gone to be used on the new tabernacle." Moses had received instructions for making each part of the tabernacle walls, roof, and furnishings. Every day the people brought gifts to be used for the building. Ram had given his armbands to be melted down for their copper. He had been amazed at the heaps of gold, silver, copper, colored yarns, goat skins, and sea cow skins piling up for the work ahead. Benj turned to Abishur. Before he could ask, Abishur answered, "Ours too. Sorry. Come back in about a month, and we'll see." Benj grunted, hoisting his catch higher on his shoulder. "You are quite the hunter," Abishur said, fingering one of the pelts. It was true. Conies lived in groups of 50 or more, with a system of guard conies who whistled a warning at the approach of danger. A hunter would have to be quick to catch even one before they scurried into the rocks. Benj fell into step with the others. He was proud of his catch. It had been a good day. Conies weren't all that he'd found. He said nothing of the bag tied to his belt. Time enough for that later, after he had shown it to Tirzah. As they entered the camp, Abigail joined them. Ever since the funeral, she kept turning up with little offerings of sympathy. She was still bringing honey cakes, though they seemed to be meant more for Abishur than the rest of the family. This time she held out a small bowl. "A bit of stew," she said lightly. "I made it myself. I hope you like it." Her long lashes fluttered shyly. Abishur smiled, taking the bowl from her hands. It was small, just enough for one person. "I'm sure my mother will love it," he teased. Instantly her eyes grew wide with shock. "But," he continued, "if you don't mind, I'm starving and shall eat it myself." Blushing, Abigail laughed her silvery laugh. Ram grinned and thumped his cousin's shoulder heartily. "Some people have all the breaks," he said. Turning to Abigail, he made a small mock bow. "Fair one, should you desire to have another test your cooking skill, I am at your service." Before he could duck, Abigail gave a strong pull to his headpiece. "I do not cook for bears," she said, turning to run lightly away. She did not stop to chat with Tirzah, who was just coming to where the little group stood. Tirzah put down her empty basket and ran her fingers lightly over the coney skins. Abishur and Ram were already on their way to the tents. Tirzah looked up to see Benj staring at her, his dark eyes dancing with flecks of light. "Nice, eh?" he said. Tirzah only nodded and picked up a long set of whiskers hanging from one of the hides. Benj fished in the pocket at his belt with his free hand. "I have something else to show you. Tiz, look here." In his hand was a large flat stone. Tirzah took the stone, curious to inspect the grooves she saw imprinted on its side. "Why, it's a fish! The whole body of a fish!" "Right, bones and all," Benj said. "And see, there on the side, a seashell embedded in the rock." "Where in the world did you find it?" Tirzah asked. Ben scratched his head as he answered. "That's the funny part. You can tell that the shell got caught in the rock somehow, and I think the fish did too. It's so perfect. What I'd like to know is, how did that rock get attached to the top of a hill in the middle of the desert?" Tirzah held the whitish rock carefully, turning it first one way, then another. "What will you do with it?" she asked. Benj looked surprised. "Didn't you know? It's yours, of course." Now it was Tirzah's turn to be surprised. "I shouldn't keep it, Benj. It's too wonderful." She held the rock in both hands, wanting it, yet unsure what to do. Benj settled the matter. "Take it. I meant you to have it. Besides, there are probably others. Next time I go hunting up there, I'll look around for more." They had begun walking slowly toward camp. Tirzah with the rock in her basket. Benj kept the coney skins on the shoulder farthest from Tirzah. Already they were beginning to smell badly and would get worse before they were cured. All evening Tirzah kept the rock a secret. When everyone was seated around the fire, she brought it out and passed it around. When it came to Molid, he looked at it a long while. "This is a sign," he said finally, glancing at Benj, "a sign of the great flood that once covered the hill and left this behind until you found it today, son." Her father spoke up from the shadows of the fire. "I have heard Moses tell the story of our ancestor Noah and the great flood, but it would please me to hear it again, Molid, if you would tell it." When Molid finished, a feeling like awe and peace mixed together filled Tirzah's mind. How great Yahweh was!